Hitler used the semantics of race, semantics and characteristics of race. Therefore, this was about race. Hitler, or the people he admired, always talking about the Aryan race, they basically created a dividing line between people who were, they had certain physical characteristics, which they would actually measure people's heads in Nazi Germany, and they would hold up a palette of skin tones and hold them up to people's faces. And they openly talked about how the swarthy people, not just Jewish people, but the Roma, the Gypsies, how dark your skin was, or whether you had a nose that had a certain characteristic. And this is Tatiana with Back to Facts. I just thought I'd jump on to talk about the latest news item of Whoopi Goldberg saying something really shocking about the Holocaust and not appearing to know that what she had said was flat out wrong. I saw the soundbite and she said, the Holocaust was not about race. Her co-hosts were kind of like, oh, well. And then I heard Joy, well, people call it a race. Well, technically, race is made up by people who are obsessed with race. Speaking of people who are obsessed with race, critical race theory appears to hold that Jewish people are perpetuating the systemic racism reinforced and forced on the world by white people. This, of course, results in attributing qualities, positive or negative, to groups of people rather than without evaluating people's behavior. There were a lot of cartoons in Nazi Germany showing a very exaggerated looking Jew with a beard, and it was really, really hateful, and I can't imagine being part of any group at all that was made fun of like that, especially for physical characteristics. I think this is a good opportunity for us to really realize how people other than us and other groups view the world. I did a little research on Whoopi. So her dad was a Baptist minister, her mom was a nurse and teacher, and she lived she was born in Manhattan, but I think her grandparents were from the South. I don't know the source on this, and I don't know how true it is, but she said that she thought Goldberg was a name in her family. And then she said something like, I just know I'm Jewish in some interview. And then it came out later that her mom told her she didn't have a Jewish enough sounding name to make it in Hollywood, which is really odd because a lot of people with Jewish last names change them to not sound Jewish, but the people behind the cameras were usually the ones who had, like Louis B. Mayer. They did not change their names to non-Jewish names. So it's just interesting that her mother thought that her name wasn't Jewish enough. Whatever the case may be, the woman has talent. One of the first things that brought her to the national scene is that she played a kind of charming girl in The Color Purple. And her character was central to the movie The Color Purple that Steven Spielberg made in, I think, the mid-'80s. Obviously, she is left of center in her politics. From the point of view of an African-American woman raised in the housing projects, Manhattan, New York City, seeing a lot of privileged people around her, and they probably were mostly white. That's not always the case, as we know. Having grown up like that and been around Jewish people in New York City, I could see her viewing Jewish people as white. Now, in some circles, they behave as white and they check the box of white, like I said. But then you have the Sephardic Jews, they're Latin, and you have the Ashkenazi Jews, and they're European, so they're considered white. But really, all of this destroys the myth of race. So what I would say is that Hitler used the semantics of race, semantics and characteristics of race. I heard that he modeled his racial concerns on the American Eugenics movement. It was a very popular book that came out of Washington State, actually, in the 20s or 30s. And it was very popular. A lot of Americans believed in eugenics. They just believed that imbeciles shouldn't be reproducing. There was something called the Enclosures Act in England, and it herded everybody from the countryside, said, yo, you can't be on this land anymore, it belongs to this lord, and they herded them into the cities. It was literally called the Enclosures Act. They're sitting there, they've got them in the cities, basically living in their own filth, eating barely edible food, having a really hard time, addiction and all these things, and then calling them imbeciles and saying they shouldn't reproduce. That just burns me up. So Hitler based a lot of his notions on the eugenics ideas, which basically made race a bigger issue than it actually is if you actually look at genes and chromosomes. People who are not from the United States find it puzzling that we view things as black and white issues of race very often. And I think it is our shifting paradigm where we sometimes say,
black, it's white. It's black, it's white. But then we go, but it's Jewish, but it's Hispanic, but it's Asian, Pacific Islander, but it's people of color, it's brown, it's yellow, it's red.
There's a time when it really still is just divided into it's black and it's white. Not every society in this world thinks that way. I think they still do go by skin tone. So there is racism in other countries based on how, quote, white they look. Racism has been a problem since the beginning of time. Very often it's tribal. It's like my group versus your group. My group is better than your group. With Whoopi, she clearly sees Jewish people as white. And I have to say, I've talked to African Americans who say that those who have Jewish ancestry are white, and so they have white privilege. What it really comes down to is privilege is the level that your parents are at, which enables them to take enough time to teach you, to condition you to know what it means to work hard, know what it is to have consistency and routine. And white people don't have a premium on that. You know what has a premium on that? Those who lived in Africa before they became slaves. They had their family name, they got married, and then they would get married in the United States, but then they would their children would be sold, especially when the cotton trade kicked into high gear, and they had such a demand for slaves. They started breaking up families. If you ever want to read a book, it's a really good book. It's called The Half Has Never Been Told. It's all about slavery from actual former slaves' writings. It's absolutely mind-blowing in all ways, and it has reinforced my belief that the more we know about history, the more united we can become, and the more we can see our commonalities. And so when I say that parents and family are the most important thing, I mean it. When you are born as a slave and you don't even know your family name, and you take the name of your slave owner, that's like, you can't get more cruel in erasing someone than erasing their family. So when conservatives say that absent fathers are the biggest problem in black communities or urban communities, they are not wrong at all. And when liberals say people in urban communities and people who are of a lower socioeconomic level have disadvantages and aren't as privileged, they are also correct. So without an agenda, we can pursue history in all its multifaceted forms, not blaming any one race. Otherwise, we are doomed to fall into the same trap that we've been in for thousands of years. For now is the time to realize what you and I both know, that there is a better way.